Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Shanye, and I am hosting with Geraldine today for this community call on February 3rd regarding budgeting. We are so happy to have everyone here for joining us today with our three amazing speakers. We are going to start off this call with the question of the day. Feel free to answer it in the chat. What percentage of your organization plays a part in the budgeting process? So if you know that, go ahead and post it in the chat, even if it's best guesstimate. And then Geraldine, if you see any that are in the chat that, oh wow, I see 100%. So that is awesome. 10%, 1%. Okay. So I love to see the differences there.
Yeah, 100% is impressive.
And it looks like quite a bit have 100%. So that kind of communal look at budget. I'm also seeing some board, some just me. So it's interesting to see across different organizations, you know, what they're looking at in terms of budgeting. So keep those answers coming. We want to know exactly how much of your organization is participating. So thank you. Next, we will jump into national updates. So now is the time to share if you have any updates within your group. We do ask that you keep the update to under a minute to make time for today's program. And you can also share those links directly in the chat if you want to go as well. So for those that are here for the first time, that can include anything that your organization is presenting on. I know we have some expo speakers on here, or anything else that you are participating in or that your org is wanting to promote.
Hey, can I jump in? This is Allison. Let's turn on my video and maybe I can spotlight myself. So guys, oh, there's my little doggies in the background. I really highly recommend this webcast next Tuesday, February 11th. You'll see the link in the chat to register, but it's with Dr. Cinda Crawford and Julie Levy, and they're going to talk all about that avian flu virus and how it impacts cats in your shelter. So I recommend at least registering, and then you can watch the recording if you can't make the live webcast. So that's it for me.
This is Nancy from the Bella Vista Animal Shelter, and we have the opportunity to be part of the Puppy Bowl on February 9th. So we're super excited. I have no idea what that means. They've asked us for some information regarding one of our puppies, so I think it'll be an adoption card that's posted. But we're very excited about it. It's nothing that we've ever had before. So hopefully you guys can tune in on February 9th. Animal Planet will be featuring the Puppy Bowl, and you might see us there.
That is so cool and so exciting. That is congratulations. I'll feel like I know a celebrity, right? When I'm like watching it. So that's amazing. Congrats, Nancy. I'll go ahead and go in honor of Black History Month. I will be dropping Ginger Naps, an animal advocacy group, in the chat. So if you guys want to go ahead and check out her Instagram, I think that that's a great way to kick off the month. We'll give it maybe another minute or two before we jump into our panel.
Hey, this is Kristen from the Community Cats podcast. We have a workshop coming up on February 15th for, it's called From the Backyard to the Front Page, Building a TNR Movement. And it covers things like how to recruit trappers, get funding, find veterinarians, find holding space. It's the back end organization of a trapping project. So if you would like to take that, I will put the link in the chat.
Hey everyone, this is Nicole Hazard from the Human Animal Support Services project. I am standing in for Elke today. We have two announcements from Haas that I will drop in the chat. One of which is from our intake triage project that was taking place last year. And we just had findings released, so I will put that there. And then we have a webinar coming up on February 13th related to intake to placement, and we would love to see you there. More information in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead and post it on the chat. I'm sure some people are very excited to hear that. So let's go ahead and kick off our speakers' introductions and allow them to introduce themselves. So if our speakers want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, we'll jump into the questions right after.
Good morning. Happy to be here. My name is Alma Torres, currently the interim director of the Fresno Animal Center. I've been in this role probably about 1.5 years. My curriculum includes about over 20 years of finance experience, mainly in budgeting and all sorts of accounting. So I'm happy to be here and hopefully, be useful to you all.
Hey everyone, I'm Christine McClintock. I am the shelter manager here in Tehama County in Northern California. So I have been here about 12 years and have a few other years before that in veterinary and shelter medicine. And I am coming for the more rural perspective on county budgeting and county sheltering.
And I'm Kris Watson. I am the Director of Animal Services for the City of San Bernardino here in Southern California. I have been in animal welfare for over 18 years, part of it in Orange County and the rest of it here in the City of San Bernardino for the past 5 years, moving up through different roles, a lot of them having to do with budgets and departments and spending.
Thank you all for your expertise. It sounds like we have a lot of experience here, so it's really exciting to hear what you guys have to say for some of these questions. So Geraldine, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about today's topic because we all know like the budget is so tied in closely with any organization's strategic plan. And it's interesting more so today because all of you are from municipal shelters. And so, from that point of view, we're interested to hear how your budgeting framework, like sort of, and your process comes about. So could you like talk us through that process?
I'm happy to answer our process. For us, yes, we're a municipal shelter. We just entered the arena. Historically, we had contracted out to outside organizations for animal control, and for 1 year now, we've been handling it in-house. Some of the things that are really important as we develop the budget is what are our priorities? What are our mandates? What do we actually have to fulfill? It's always very important that you prioritize your contractual obligations and basically build around that. Take a look at what resources you have available, what resources you have been granted, and prioritize those things that are essential to carry out the duties of animal control.
I think for me, municipal shelters in general have a very rigid budget process and timeline. So I apologize for those of you that may be on a nonprofit that have a different process, but ours, we have to set our budget 4 years before the fiscal year starts. And then we have very specific deadlines throughout the year when we have to make adjustments, when we have to take it to the board. So having those deadlines in some sense actually helps because you can look at your averages for the last several years. I know all yours is new, but for me, we've been doing this since 1950. So I can look at the last several years. For municipal shelters, it's usually public record. You probably may not know this, but I guarantee you that your auditor has it all on their website for the last several years. So you can look at your averages, what you budgeted, what you actually spent, and use those 3 and 5 year averages to make adjustments to your budget going forward with that data.
And for us here, the same thing. Obviously, we're doing budgets over a year in advance. And we start with what we spent the previous year. And so looking at what programs were effective, what are we spending the money on, where can we make some savings? I know a lot of municipalities are looking at budget cuts at the moment, but really looking at what programs are effective. And as Alma mentioned, what matches your mission and the things that you absolutely have to do, that your mandates.
Very interesting. We saw in the chat when we asked about, what percentage of your employees are involved in the budgeting process. Like we had like 100% as well as like it's only me. So what's the kind of involvement that you have at your municipal shelters with employees in the budgeting process? And do you actually train them? Like, people who've never worked in the budgeting process may not know how it fits in, like with the income and expenses and cash flow and all of that. So how does that work?
For us, I think that it is imperative that everybody that works at the center is involved in the budget process. And that does not necessarily mean that they're creating it or that they're doing all of the calculations. It means that they need to be aware, because their actions contribute to expenditures. Certain things that, we always want to be mindful of is that there are only, so many resources. So when, somebody is overfeeding an animal, if you add that up, that could equate to quite a bit of money in the end, in addition to even creating more work because of additional labor that's required. So it's always imperative that every employee, everyone that comes in touch with the actions that are taking place, is somewhat aware of how the resources are limited and how they impact the decisions at the end. For municipal shelters, we are always on a tight shoestring budget because we're always competing with other departments that also have priorities. So it's very important that even though they may not be building the budget, they know that they're part of carrying out and executing the duties that lead to those final numbers.
So for us here in San Bernardino, everybody, like Alma said, everybody has to know, like, we need to make sure that we're taking care of our equipment. That costs money. Really letting animal care staff know exactly how much a vehicle costs right now with the animal control boxes, to make sure that they're taking care of their equipment so that it can last as long as possible. As far as actually defining like the numbers and stuff, that's usually the executive team. So me, my deputy director, and my executive assistant we all have access to that, the software that the city uses. But the department, again, knowing that, everything we do, every action we do, every adoption fee that we waive is going to affect us moving forward.
Christine, we can't really hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me any better now? I apologize. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I was just saying that I think putting it in the framework of how the budget affects the animals in their care, they have to have that direct correlation sometimes, especially our line staff, our animal care staff, what numbers look like on a spreadsheet doesn't really affect them. They're still going to get their paycheck, but putting it in terms of how it affects the animals. Like if we spend all of our medical fund right now on this one specific animal, then the rest of the year, every parvo puppy that comes through here, we're going to have to euthanize. So that sometimes just putting things in that perspective and making them understand helps them advocate in the same way. Little things like just taking care of their equipment, whether it be dog box trucks or even just simple things, can really affect that bottom line as far as making sure that they're paying attention and how it affects the individual animals in their care.
If I may add, because Christine did touch upon something that we do here in the city of Fresno, and that's we monitor even idling time on a vehicle. And sometimes, it's so important to know exactly how we're approaching our operation. For example, here in the Central Valley of California, it gets over 110 degrees at times. Well, those are the times that we want to make sure that we're idling, because we're still providing that essential care to the animal. We're just not putting it in box truck and having it be in the heat. And that allows us to then come back and be able to present to our administration, hey, yes, we may not be complying with some of the policies that are required, but here is the reason why. Yes, we want to be aware of what our constraints are, but at the same time, taking care of the animals is also part of our mandate.
So we did have someone that posted in the chat. Christine, you mentioned that these budgets are typically public records. So how can they find these sample budgets so that they can then apply them to their organizations?
For my county, the entire county budget is posted annually on the website. You can see however many years worth, and then it's broken down by department. I am happy to send mine to anybody that asks. We see about 2,500 animals a year for anybody that's relevant to that. But a lot of our budget, like we've mentioned, our budget timeline is dictated by the state. So are our budget accounts, like even our account numbers, we can't just arbitrarily name an account number. That's all dictated by the state. And so that specific physical framework is probably already mandated in your line item budgets. But I'm happy to share mine if anybody needs it.
Typically, most city and county and township websites post the full budget. And usually, in California, we're required to do a budget presentation in an open meeting with our mayor and city council or the board of supervisors. And so those are generally posted, and I encourage anybody to really get involved in that process and go in person and see like the discussions going back and forth.
Okay. So we have another question in the chat that ties into our next question. What categories do you use for budgeting? So can you give us some general categories of what might be included in that budget?
I'm not gonna lie, some of our category names don't really dictate what we are. And again, that has to do with state. So we have an account, our biggest account is called Special Department Expense. And that just means that I'm the only department that has these kind of expenditures. So animal food, litter, that sort of thing. But though you guys kind of should already have an idea of what your biggest expenditures are. For most of us right now, staff, staff usually is 50 or more % of your budget. Veterinary care is going to be huge. I'm sure there are others, but those are the two that come to mind as the most common expenses. And then, sorry, it looks like somebody else has a question in chat about emergencies. I'm going to be honest, we don't budget specifically for emergencies. That is something that you have to take in flux with any other intake spike. We did have a pretty big, the park fire burned from one end of our county to the other. And we just kind of unfortunately have to take it in stride. And that's one of the main parts, unfortunately, of having those emergencies is you just can't plan for everything. So you have to plan for your base and then make adjustments as those emergencies come up.
So for us, we have, obviously staffing. Employee salaries plus benefits. And so those are things that you have to take into account. And for us, that's about 66%. We have a $10.3 million budget, which seems like an awful lot. But when you start breaking that down into the expenses, it goes really fast. So, 66% of that is staffing and employee benefits, including workers' compensation insurance. And then, we talk about other professional services, professional contractual services, which could be veterinary care at outside clinics, if you don't have a vet on site. Also, like, are you having anybody come and do any of the landscaping at your facility? Do you have people that you're using for legal? All of those things could come under that umbrella. And then you have like your vehicles and that expense that's usually broken out. Part of the municipality, you do have other expenses that aren't maybe necessarily, you don't have staff on site, but you're paying for the HR expense at City Hall or the Board of Supervisors. You're paying for the IT charges for them to get everything set up on your computer, your treasury, your accounting department. All of those are what we call indirect costs. And so your staff and your department is what's called a direct cost. And then the indirect cost are all of the support systems that are in place at the municipality to help you. And so those are sometimes kind of buried in your budget. And then finally, like, supplies. So, it's just under, for us, it's just under the category of materials and supplies, but That could be dog food. That could be for us, that is veterinary medical supplies. So all of our vaccines, all of those things fall under that supplies, materials and supplies category.
We also follow some of the same budgeting process as Christine does. One thing that we do add is some cost accounting. Since we started, we wanted to really evaluate what our programs are delivering, what the cost of those programs are, and really determine our overhead, such as the cost of electricity, the cost of water, because some of these are fixed cost that regardless of whether you take one animal in or you take in 2,000, you're still going to have to pay. So it's always important to know what things you are have some flexibility on and what things you do not. Christine mentioned, some of the indirect cost, for us, we receive charges for IT when we do not have employees, but they are accessible to us. They do make sure that our computers are working, that when we have issues, they respond to these issues. So there's just a lot of the cost. I would suggest that, as you're building your budget, and if you're the person responsible for managing it, that you truly just know everything. And sometimes it seems tedious down to the last penny, but I can tell you that that last penny will help you make appropriate strategic decisions and or inform the people that can help you develop better programs.
That's amazing. I love how, you deal with big budget line items and all of you are simplifying it in a way that is so easy to understand and digest. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. I was wondering, when you have big budget cuts, which is inevitable, for any organization, whether you're municipal or a private animal shelter, how do you sort of develop strategies to navigate still providing life-saving care within the budgets that you're allocated eventually?
I think that that's always a challenge. I don't know, Christine, did you want to go first? For us as a municipality, there are things that we have to consider, and one of them is salaries. So we always have things that we have to prioritize, contractual obligations. These are things that we have zero control over, and or if we do, that means that something is not getting done. So once again, you really have to know your budget and what your priorities are, what you are required and mandated to do, in order to be able to make the decisions that reflect the availability of resources. And at times, you have to find other sources of funds, including grants, including, different venues, maybe even working with partner organizations in the community that can help with that. We can't hear you,
Christine, we
Christine.
can't hear you.
No.
Is this any better? Can you hear me okay? Okay, sorry, thank you. So for us, from a municipal standpoint, anytime we're dealing with a budget cut, which I've done 2 5% and a 2.5%, the important thing to keep in mind is you are probably not getting that back. I don't care how many times they promise you that this is a 1-year thing and we'll give it back next year. It's most likely not going to. So you have to make sure that that cut you're making is sustainable. For us, I typically try to avoid budget cuts by instead increasing revenue. Because a lot of times that's what the county is looking for, right? They're looking for you to decrease your expense because they're not wanting to give you as much from the general fund. For me, sometimes that means I'm going to increase revenue from another source in exchange for that instead of cutting that budget. So what that means is that the county is then giving me less, but my budgets aren't going down. So we have contracts with the cities and counties that we partner with to provide sheltering services. And so anytime that we reduce expenditures, it actually is going to, in the long run, reduce their payment to me, right? So anytime I cut my expenditures, it's actually going to cost the county money in the long run. And I often have to explain that over and over and over to the board of supervisors and the department heads and everybody else that's involved. But anytime you can put it in the framework of this is actually going to cost us more in the long run, and here's why, that can really be beneficial. So I have cut 5%, but the last 2 cuts that we faced, I increased my revenue and then just talked my way out of the last one. So because it's going to cost us more in the long run, because if we're not spending the money, then the cities aren't reimbursing us for our costs. So that's something to keep in mind if you have contracts like that and how they're negotiated. Those long-term effects aren't often what's in the forefront of the county's mind or your whatever agency you work for.
So one of the things that I think is really easy when you're looking at budget cuts, because usually staffing is the highest cost, right? The highest percentage. And so usually municipalities look to either furlough or cut positions. One of the issues for us is that most of the time we're working below the ideal number of staff per animal. There are public expectations on all of us right now to try and keep animals for as long as possible. And staff safety as well as animal safety plays a huge role. And so being able to explain to your HR department and your city officials that you reduce staffing, my concern is that we're going to see, additional incidents and claims on workers' comp go up. That increases your costs, not only that year, but moving forward. Being able to tie what we're doing to both animal welfare and public safety, especially when you're talking about animal control, if you've got animal control involved in your contract. The fewer people out there on the ground, it'd be like looking at PD or fire. You start removing those people from the equation, additional costs, claims against the city, claims against the county start to increase. And so really seeing where is that minimum, being able to advocate for your programs. And then like Alma said, looking for alternatives. So is there any sort of grant funding at the major organizations, Maddie's Fund, PetSmart, looking at Michelson Found Animals, looking at Best Friends, trying to work with some nonprofit organizations to offset those costs. Sometimes you can get like some of the positions covered. So if you're like community outreach, something that you can tie to your life saving, you can get some additional grant funding to cover that. So you can take that savings and apply it to the other crucial programming that you have.
Just Chris's point about tying it to safety, honestly, can be one of your biggest budget savers when you're arguing to administrative type staff. The county as a whole isn't necessarily going to care about animal lives and your life release rate and whatever you're working on, but nobody wants to deal with OSHA. So anytime you can reduce workers' comp claims, you're reducing safety, you're providing additional training, whatever it is, that can be not only a great way to kind of counteract any budget cuts, but can actually help you add to your budget if it's something that is going to, realistically help with staff safety. And anytime that they're looking at reducing staff, I tend to put it in a framework of, okay, I don't have extra staff. So if you reduce the staff, I have to close the shelter to the public this number of days. For that reason, my stray hold is now longer. I'm now holding these animals an additional 3 days. And the cost of care per day is this. So this is what the actual ongoing cost is going to be. If you break it down like that, it is typically cheaper to have the staff member on hand than it is to hold the animals longer for the course of a fiscal year. So those are really helpful ways to frame that budget conversation.
I really do love that approach to safety, like your point being no one wants to deal with OSHA, right? Really being that point of advocating for why you need those funds, right? We want to keep our staff safe, and we want to make sure that they understand that. So thank you for that. Our next question, you talked a little bit about it, but we also have some questions coming in from the chat about innovative funding solutions. So can you share a few more examples and resources or initiatives that have supported your shelter's budget?
For us, honestly, our city and county contracts are a lifesaver when it comes to that. We changed how we structure those contracts, how we get reimbursed from the cities and the county that we contract with. We did completely away with per animal reimbursement. It is miserable for everybody. It is time consuming. Nobody wants to argue with a chief of police about which side of the street a dog was found on and whether it's city or county. So if you are in that position, I cannot encourage you enough to change the way that you do your contract. We do ours on a percentage of the human population and average of 3-year expenses. We can budget ahead for the whole year based on that contract. We know how much each organization is going to reimburse us for the fiscal year. We're going to get that quarterly. We know what that's going to look like. So those for us, I think they cover about 40% of our expenses because of the population size that we serve. And so if you have those contracts, those are really something to look critically at. It is really hard sometimes to explain to those smaller agencies how expensive animal sheltering is. But you know, if everybody's paying their fair share, you get a better economy of scale. And you save money for everybody all around by making sure that that's an equitable distribution of those expenses.
One of the things that we do is, you know, we're not afraid of asking for help. So we're a municipal agency, but looking at where, you know, the public can help you, usually with small supplies and other things, blankets, towels. You know, for us, we'll put, you know, we have an Amazon wish list. And so when we're running critically low on supplies, then you put out on social media that you need help with, you know, I need some wet kitten food. We're running low on that. Then the public usually steps up to help fill that gap. We've been lucky enough, we're in an area where we have a lot of Amazon distribution hubs, and they look to donate what they call stuff that's spoiled, but it's not really spoiled. So maybe a bag of dog food that somebody had ordered became opened and they're taping it shut. They can't send that off to the person who ordered it. And so it sits there, and usually they wind up throwing it out. So can you go and make relationships with them and get that donated to your organization to offset the cost? Until recently, we get about until recently we were getting 6,000 animals a year. We have some additional contracts. And so last year I brought in 10,000 dogs and cats. And within the past couple of months, the first time in several years, the department has had to actually purchase food because the donations from the warehouses in the area make sure that we make that amount. But there's also partnerships with like Science Diet and other national vendors that can help reduce your cost. But looking at anything else, any partnerships, anything that you can do with other agencies in your area to offset the cost of what you're having to purchase helps.
You're muted, Alma.
Apologies. Some of the things that have been helpful here in our community is we have a really low access to care score, and partnering with organizations that can help with that. For example, San Francisco SPCA received a grant where they are able to come into this community and provide low-cost spay-neuter. And a lot of times what it takes is just sort of getting the metrics and telling the story. So like Christine said, don't be shy. Tell your story, tell your struggles. There are plenty of organizations out there that want to help. And if you can add metrics to it and really say, you know, these things are going to help by doing X, Y, or Z, then I think that, you know, you're able to get a little bit more assistance to carry out your duties.
Wonderful. I mean, you know, I was also thinking about like there in the whole funding world, there is like, you know, the almost like a competition for like the general fund dollars, which are not restricted. And then you have like restricted grants and restricted funds. So could you like talk a little bit more about how you manage those and how you allocate those between your different programs and services?
So our department is part of the general fund. There's not, when you're talking about special funds, usually that's at the city or the county level. And for example, we have a special tax revenue that the city has, an extra 0.5%. But there's a whole committee that votes on what that can be utilized for. And most of the time, because of our city, we've got 215,000 residents, right? So we're a pretty large municipality. And so a lot of that goes towards, exactly what most of the residents, including the people who aren't pet owners, can see, whether that's fixing the roads or other things. And so that's something for us, for animal services, it's very difficult for us to try and get at that special, those special funds, because they're usually apportioned for specific uses. Sometimes it's capital improvement, sometimes it's just road repair and infrastructure needs. And as you guys know, we don't necessarily fall under that infrastructure. I know the ARPA, when you're talking about the grants that were released a few years ago, animal services really didn't have a big nexus to that, at least in California. But really talking to the other departments too, and seeing what they can give to you after they're done with it. So like the police department, are they able to share radios with you so that you can reduce your cost in buying new ones? Looking at trying to help and work with other department heads might be able to assist you in reducing some of those costs.
I think working with other departments can actually be a huge benefit to you. The more that you work with those departments, you are able to access not necessarily funds. I don't know that I've ever gotten funds from another department, but the resources that they utilize can be really great. So I think I don't have like field officers, but our shelter vehicles are almost all hand-me-downs from other departments. Other departments have, they replace their vehicles frequently. We just need to go to the vet and back. So all of our vehicles are hand-me-downs. I didn't have to pay for them. Yeah, I paid maintenance, but not the vehicle itself. If you have any relationship with the sheriffs or whoever runs the jail in your community, we have a lot of people that have to work off, jail time on an ankle monitor, and they're really great at pulling weeds. They're really great at cleaning the yards. Whatever it is that you need, some of those resources and those in-kind type of donations really make a big difference. Sometimes we get a group of people together, they'll come and replace a fence or something like that. So those community service programs can really work for you in a not necessarily hands-on animal basis, but in a general shelter maintenance. And that can help, those costs all add up. They get really expensive to do any repairs. So every once in a while we'll get somebody that's really good at something specific. I had, somebody did all the maintenance on our swamp coolers one year because he got in trouble and had to work 2 days here. So he did swamp cooler maintenance and saved us all those calls.
Thank you. I love looking at the exchange of services for something like a barter service almost. So that is, I think, a great innovative solution for that. We are about 10 minutes out, so I want to give time to hit the rest of the questions from the chat. So are there any tips or tricks for your budgeting process, like reducing costs, examples of city contracts, sample budgets, software or platforms or resources that you want to share before this call ends with the rest of the community?
I think if you're not utilizing them, all of the various programs for shelters for veterinary costs, vaccines are really life-saving. So I use Zoetis for shelters, but I know Boehringer Ingram has one as well. We use Science Diet for food, but I know like Purina has one, Royal Canin has one. All those different shelter programs really do help with overall cost when you're not paying that ticket price. So MWI is we use as our distributor, and they have a shelter program. Anytime you buy their generic, it's even cheaper. We don't have a vet on site, so if you have a vet of record that is willing to help you with those, and buying those generic medications can save you a lot of money. Anytime that you're paying a vet markup, you're usually paying 150 to 200% markup at a vet. That's just standard across the board. So if you can buy the medication yourselves and your vet will work with you on labeling them or dosing protocols, overall, that's going to save you a significant amount. And it makes us able to treat things that we would not be able to treat at full price.
one of the things that, making sure you do on a yearly basis is looking at what are the things that you buy the most, leashes, right? And then continuously going and seeing and looking for additional pricing to see if you can get it for a lower cost with another vendor, revisiting all of those things. Sorry, my office cat wanted to help. So looking at the things that you buy the most often and seeing where you can potentially work in some savings with larger contracts.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
Oh, I was just gonna say one thing to consider too is I know that Kris had touched on it, and I think Alma has a resource as well, is looking at the industry in your community. You guys know your community better than I do, but like we are pretty rural. We have ag based. One of our big companies here is actually walnuts, and one of them ended up using walnut shells to make cat litter. And we contacted them once and said, hey, I'd love to just come buy it from you instead of buying it through the store. And they said, do you mind if we give you mislabeled bags? I go, no. So that's 10 cents a pound I'm paying for my cat litter instead of paying like $30, $40 a bag at the store. So the different resources in your community, the different industries, and you would be surprised at the ways that they can support you. Distribution centers for Amazon and Walmart always have returns that they can't resell, and they typically will donate them to nonprofits. So sometimes you have to deal with like a whole pallet of dog beds or something weird like that, but it can really save you money. And a lot of them, like I said, the food that they had to tape over a hole in the bag really helps support their community.
I think that one of the things that I'd really like to touch upon and remind everybody is to create the relationships with the organizations that can help you. We don't have to go at this alone. There are plenty of organizations in your community, and you know them best, that all you might need to do is reach out and say, hey, how can we make this work that, so that the cost is more efficient for both of us. So always reach out. Once again, as I said earlier, what's the worst that can happen? They might just tell you no, or they might say, hey, that's a great idea. Let's do something different.
Awesome. So, I was thinking about communication. So communication is so important internally, like to our teams, explaining, why we need to have this budgeting process in the first place. But then what about communication to the community that we're serving? Because, ultimately, like if there are budget cuts or, there are certain services we are unable to provide, like how do you communicate to your community so that they understand your limitations when they come up?
One of the biggest questions we get right now is on animal medical care. And so we don't have a vet on site, which means that any injured animal or sick animal that rises above what my RVTs can provide have to go to an outside vet. And we have to weigh the costs, right? Like, vet care is expensive. And in Southern California here, where we don't have, a lot of vets, my average cost right now is at least $800 per animal that I have to send over, up to potentially like $2,000. And when you're bringing in over 10,000 animals a year, I can't, and my budget is $300,000 for veterinary medical care overall, including spay, neuter, and everything else. I can't spend $2,000 on one animal because that leaves me nothing for the other animals. And especially looking at, is this, how old is this animal? What kind of condition is it? And asking for help. So we normally send those animals to rescue, but when the community asks why we can't pay that $2,000, really explaining to them like that's, individually, yes, if you had your own animal, even then people would stretch to pay that amount. But I have to balance that $300,000 on 10,000 animals. And so that's a huge, huge burden for us. And that I can't afford to spend it. Yes, I would like to, but right now I really can't. And usually the community understands that's a challenge. We all have challenges with our own animals, and talking to them too about what they can and can't spend on their pets. And when they're looking at treatment options, basing that on what's affordable, what's gold standard care, what's average, and what can you get through in order to make sure that the animal is comfortable while you're waiting for rescue.
I think we could probably do a whole call on access to veterinary care and the cost for both shelters and the public. But I will say that, I'm in the same boat. We don't have an emergency clinic even in our county or nearby. It's at least an hour, if not two, depending on the time of the day. So working with your vet of record on what to do in those situations is going to be your biggest cost saver. And I can't stress enough the importance of having a vet of record, even if my vet comes here once a month. Okay, so it's not like she's here all the time. We pay her a pretty chunk of money to have protocols in place to help in those situations. In California, RVTs are empowered to do quite a bit, especially in shelters, with a vet of record and a dosing protocol. And you can find a lot of ways to support the animal's medical care without necessarily having to see an emergency vet. And we are fortunate enough that our vet of record doesn't do emergency calls, but will send an RVT in at night to meet an officer and then phone triage and stabilize that pet until the next business day. And sometimes that RVT may not be an RVT, it may be me because I'm the only one available. And we will go in and we'll go, hey, pretty sure it's broken. We can give it pain meds and fluids and stabilize it until their regular business hours. So there are different ways that you can work around that access to emergency care for your shelter animals specifically. And there are different resources for your foster animals. So I think Dubert Connect is one, if you haven't used it, that offers after hours triage for your fosters. It's like $70 a month. It's not very expensive. So if you've run into that where your fosters are going to the emergency vet without talking to you, and then you're stuck with a $2,000 bill for something that could have waited till Monday, that's another resource that you guys may want to look into as far as providing that after hours triage services for your in-house fostered animals.
We do have an after hours emergency veterinarian, and we do have a veterinarian in-house, but we made sure that our contracts with the veterinarians were very specific to have a maximum amount per animal, and anything beyond that would either, require that, they get approval, or we just transfer it to our veterinarian. But it is difficult because I think we all are in this field because we want to save the most amount of animals, but sometimes that is just not feasible or possible given our budgetary constraints and the high cost of veterinary care. And kind of tying back to the question, it's really about keeping transparency with the community, and letting them know, hey, these are the things that we have to choose between. And this is what we're doing so that these animals have the best outcome. And this is how you can be part of the solution. So really trying to involve your community and bringing them back that, they are part of the solution as well. And if we, things that we do is we always try to get them to foster. We may provide all the medical care for broken bones, ask them to come in and every so often so that, a bandage might be changed. But when we have to do it in-house, that means that we're not able to help other animals. So really just being transparent about what the offsets are when we don't have community assistance.
I would say too, for us, any medical care we provide beyond the state mandated, keep them content for the 5-day straight hold, is entirely funded by donations. We have separate donation accounts for that. They're trust accounts for those of you that do municipal sheltering. And so when we're explaining that to the public, our options are, I can treat this dog with antibiotics for 5 days for 2 weeks with this minimal, $20 antibiotic that I bought direct, or if I can't pay $2,000 for blood work and x-rays and this and that. If the vet looked at it and said, this is the ideal. Sometimes we can't do the ideal. Sometimes we can do the minimum and see how they respond. But those donation funds and explaining where those funds are going, we have a lot of people that choose to donate directly to the medical care. When we explain that pain meds and antibiotics outside of the stray hold are donation funded, that's a direct, people can feel that, they can feel I'm providing pain meds for this animal. I'm helping keep this animal comfortable while it heals from this fracture. Whatever it is, sometimes it's a really nice pull at the heartstrings. And even if it's $5, $10, $15, that does cover pain meds for a few days for an animal. So we get quite a bit that's directed to medical fund.
Wow, I love that. Love the relationships with veterinarians. I love the different approaches that you have. If you don't have a vet on site, or you only have a vet during certain hours, or you have a vet on staff, that there are solutions. So thank you all for sharing that. Alma, Christine, Kris, I cannot thank you all enough for showing up today and helping everyone on this call understand their budget, whether they are a small rescue or a large municipal shelter. We are right at time, so you all did amazing with answering the questions. So yes, just thank you overall for showing up today.
I'm going to go ahead and put my email in the chat. I know a couple of you asked to see the contracts that we have with the agency. So if you just shoot me an email, I'm happy to send those over.